The scent of lilies and old polish was the first thing I noticed, a cloying sweetness that clung to the heavy, still air of the chapel. It was supposed to be a scent of celebration, of purity and new beginnings, but even then, before everything shattered, it felt thick with foreboding, like the perfume on a widow. My sister, Clara, stood at the altar, a vision in ivory lace, so delicate it seemed spun from morning mist. The afternoon sun, fractured by the stained glass depiction of a serene-faced saint, cast jewels of light across her veil and the pale curve of her shoulder. She was luminous, vibrating with a happiness so pure it was almost painful to witness. Her eyes were fixed on Liam, the man who had, over the past 2 years, become the center of her world. He was handsome in that easy, unassuming way that puts everyone at ease, a strong jaw, kind eyes, a smile that seemed to suggest he was perpetually sharing a pleasant secret with you. He was the man my parents adored, the man I had cautiously, gradually, come to trust as the keeper of my sister's heart. I sat in the front pew, the polished oak cool against my palms, my maid of honor dress a whisper of silk around my knees. I was smiling, a genuine, deep-seated smile that reached my eyes, because for the first time in a long time, Clara's world felt perfectly, securely aligned. The organ music, a grand, hopeful swell of sound, faded into a respectful silence. The minister, a man with a kind, wrinkled face, beamed at the couple. "Do you, Liam," he began, his voice a gentle, practiced cadence, "take Clara to be your lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold, from this day forward, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, until death do you part?" The silence that followed was not the traditional, breath-held pause of anticipation. It was a different kind of silence. It stretched, it thinned, it became a tangible, uncomfortable thing that pressed in on the ears. I saw Clara's smile falter, just a tiny, almost imperceptible tremor at the corner of her mouth. Liam's gaze was on the floor, on the ancient stone tiles worn smooth by generations of vows. He swallowed, the movement in his throat sharp and sudden. He lifted his head, but his eyes didn't meet Clara's. They didn't meet the minister's. They scanned the pews, a slow, deliberate sweep, and then they found me. He looked straight at me. There was no warmth in his eyes, no hidden affection. None of the things the romance novels would have you believe. There was something chillingly clear, something hard and precise, like the glint of light on a shard of glass. It was a look of calculation, of warning, of victory. Then he turned back to my sister, whose face was now a mask of fragile confusion. He took a small breath. "I can't," he said. The words were not a whisper. They were spoken with a dreadful, resonant clarity that filled every corner of the chapel, extinguishing the joyful atmosphere as surely as a snuffed candle. "I can't marry you." A collective gasp rippled through the guests, a wave of shock and disbelief. My mother's hand flew to her mouth, a strangled sob caught in her throat. My father, stiff and pale, looked as if he'd been struck. But I couldn't look away from Clara. Her face seemed to crumble in slow motion. The light in her eyes extinguished, the color drained from her cheeks, leaving her skin as white as her dress. She stared at Liam, her lips parted in a silent question, her entire being a monument to incomprehension and shattering pain. And in that moment of absolute devastation, as my sister's perfect day turned into her most public nightmare, Liam did it again. He turned his head, just slightly, and his gaze locked with mine once more over Clara's trembling shoulder. The message was clearer this time. It was an accusation, an indictment. He was pointing a finger without lifting a hand, weaving a narrative with a single, silent look. He was making me the reason. The entire chapel, 100 pairs of eyes, followed his gaze. They swiveled from his resolute, cold face to mine. In an instant, I was no longer the supportive sister, the proud maid of honor. I was the other woman, the homewrecker, the serpent in their Garden of Eden. The whispers started then, a sibilant hiss that spread from pew to pew. I felt the heat of their stares, the weight of their judgment. My own shock was a distant, cold thing, a block of ice in my chest. My primary sensation was a dizzying, sickening vertigo, as if the floor had tilted on its axis. Liam had not just broken my sister's heart, he had detonated a bomb and placed me at the epicenter of the blast. He then turned without another word to Clara and walked down the aisle. His steps were not hurried or ashamed. They were measured, firm, the sound of his dress shoes echoing on the stone with an unnerving finality. He walked past my stunned parents, past the bewildered faces of our friends and family, and out through the heavy oak doors, leaving behind a devastation so complete it was almost silent. The silence broke when Clara's knees gave way. My father caught her, her beautiful dress pooling around her as she collapsed into his arms, her body racked with silent, agonizing sobs. I stood up, my own legs unsteady, wanting to go to her, to hold her, to tell her. What? I didn't know. But as I took a step, my mother turned to me, her face a mess of tears and fury. "What did you do?" she hissed, her voice venomous. "What did you do?" The question was a slap. The accusation, born from Liam's silent, masterful performance, was already taking root. I was the cause. I was the secret. In the ruins of my sister's wedding day, I had been cast as the villain, and the real monster had just walked calmly out the door. And the worst part, the part that would haunt me for weeks to come, was the cold certainty that this was exactly what he had planned. The hours that followed were a blur of fractured moments and hushed, venomous conversations that I was not a part of. I was a ghost at the wake of my sister's happiness. While my parents bundled a catatonic Clara into a car, whisking her away from the scene of her humiliation, I was left to navigate the minefield of sympathetic glances that were really daggers of condemnation. Aunts and uncles who had bounced me on their knees now looked at me with a mixture of pity and disgust. Cousins I'd grown up with averted their eyes, whispering behind their hands as I passed. The beautiful reception hall, with its towering cake and champagne fountains, became a hall of judgment. No one spoke to me directly, not at first. They didn't need to. The air was thick with their assumptions, a suffocating blanket of collective belief. Liam's silent accusation had been more effective than any shouted confession. It left everything to the imagination, and the imagination of a scandalized wedding party is a fertile, vicious thing. I finally escaped to the deserted bridal suite, a room that should have been filled with laughter and joy, now sterile and silent. Clara's overnight bag was on the bed, a lacy nightgown laid out beside it. A bottle of chilled champagne sat in a silver bucket, 2 flutes beside it, sweating condensation. The sight of it, of all the happy, hopeful preparations, was a physical blow. I sank onto the edge of the plush bed, the silence amplifying the frantic, terrified beating of my own heart. What had happened? The question pounded in my head, a relentless, painful rhythm. Liam and I had never been close, but our interactions had always been pleasant, cordial. We had a perfectly normal brother-in-law-to-be and sister of the bride relationship. There had never been a flirtatious word, an inappropriate touch, a lingering glance. Nothing, absolutely nothing, that could justify what he had done. My mind raced backward, scrambling through the past 2 years, searching for a sign, a clue, a single moment that could explain his actions. I replayed conversations, holiday dinners, casual phone calls. Liam, always charming, always attentive to Clara, always saying the right thing. He'd helped my dad fix the deck. He'd remembered my mom's birthday with a thoughtful, expensive gift. He'd even helped me move into my new apartment, carrying heavy boxes without a single complaint. He was, by all accounts, perfect. Too perfect. The thought was a tiny, cold splinter in my mind. I pushed it away. This wasn't about him. This was about me. He had made it about me. Why? Was it possible I had missed something? Had I misinterpreted a look, a word? My own memory became a treacherous landscape. The human mind, under duress, can be a master of invention. Was I so desperate to find a reason that I was willing to invent one? No. The cold, hard certainty I'd felt in the chapel returned. His look wasn't a mistake. It wasn't a sign of secret love. It was a strategic move, a maneuver. He hadn't just left Clara, he had discredited her closest confidant in the same breath. He had isolated her from me. That was the thought that finally cut through the fog of my confusion. He didn't want me near her. He had surgically removed me from her life, ensuring that whatever comfort or counsel I might offer would be tainted, rejected. Clara would never believe a word I said now, not when she believed I had betrayed her in the most fundamental way imaginable. The phone on the bedside table rang, shrill and jarring. I stared at it, my heart leaping into my throat. It was my mother. I knew it would be. I let it ring, the sound echoing the panic in my own chest. It stopped, and a moment later, a text message notification pinged. I didn't need to read it. I knew what it would say. "Where are you? Your father is taking you home? Don't talk to anyone." It wasn't a request born of concern for my well-being. It was damage control. I was a liability, a walking, breathing scandal to be managed. The drive home was a silent, suffocating ordeal. My father gripped the steering wheel, his knuckles white, his jaw set in a line of grim disapproval. He didn't look at me. The silence was heavier than any words, filled with his disappointment and his pain for Clara. When we arrived at my parents' house, the place where Clara and I had grown up, it felt alien and hostile. The front door opened before we reached it. My mother stood there, her face pale and drawn. "Go to your room, Ilara," she said, her voice flat and devoid of emotion. "Just go." There was no hug, no comforting hand on my arm. I was a pariah in my own home. I walked past her, up the stairs I had run up and down thousands of times, each step feeling heavier than the last. I could hear their hushed, urgent voices from the living room below. The words humiliation, scandal, and my name, a recurring bitter refrain. Clara's bedroom door was closed. I hesitated, my hand hovering over the doorknob. I needed to see her, to talk to her, to look her in the eye and tell her it wasn't true. But I knew it was useless. What could I say against the evidence of her own eyes? Against the public spectacle Liam had so expertly crafted. I retreated to my own room, the one I'd left a decade ago, but that still held the ghosts of my childhood. I sat on the edge of my bed and finally looked at my phone. There were dozens of missed calls and messages from friends, a mix of concern and morbid curiosity, and then I saw it, one message from Liam. It had been sent just minutes after he'd walked out of the church. My fingers trembled as I opened it. It contained only 5 words. "This is all your fault." The audacity of it, the sheer manipulative cruelty, stole my breath. He wasn't just letting others believe a lie. He was actively reinforcing it, twisting the knife. It was a threat, a warning to stay silent, to accept the role he had assigned me. And in that moment, sitting alone in my childhood bedroom, stripped of my family's trust and my sister's love, a new feeling began to bloom amidst the fear and the confusion. It was a cold, hard knot of anger. He had underestimated me. He thought he could ruin my life, destroy my family, and walk away. He thought his little piece of theater in the church was the end of the story. But I knew with a certainty that chilled me to the bone that it was only the beginning. He had a reason for all this, a reason that had nothing to do with me and everything to do with my sister, and I was going to find out what it was. The days that followed were a masterclass in silent ostracism. I was confined to my parents' house, not by lock and key, but by a wall of unspoken shame. My mother communicated in terse, functional sentences about meals and laundry, her eyes always fixed on a point just over my shoulder. My father retreated into his workshop in the garage, the sound of his sanding and sawing a constant, abrasive reminder of his avoidance. The house, once a place of warmth and comfort, now felt like a well-appointed prison, where I was the sole inmate. My attempts to speak to Clara were met with a closed door and a stony silence from my parents. "She's not ready, Alara," my mother would say, the implication clear, "and it's your fault." The narrative had set like concrete. I had harbored a secret passion for my sister's fiancé, and he, in a moment of tortured conscience, had confessed his own illicit feelings in the most dramatic way possible. It was a story worthy of a soap opera, and my family, in their grief and humiliation, had accepted it without question. It was simpler than confronting the terrifying alternative that Liam, the man they had welcomed as a son, was something else entirely. Alone in my room, I began to fight back in the only way I could. I started to dissect the last 2 years, not with the frantic, panicked mind of the wedding day, but with a cold, methodical focus. I made a list, a timeline, every significant event, every trip, every major conversation involving Liam and Clara. I forced myself to look past the charming facade, to search for the cracks. The first anomaly I found was small, almost insignificant. About a year ago, Clara had a minor health scare, a series of fainting spells that doctors, after numerous tests, had attributed to stress and dehydration. I remembered Liam's reaction at the time. He had been a model of concern, hovering over her, making sure she drank enough water, insisting on driving her everywhere. On the surface, it was loving. But recalling it now, I remembered something else. I remembered his questions to the doctor, which had seemed odd at the time. He wasn't just asking about her recovery, he was intensely interested in the long-term prognosis, the possibility of recurrence, the specific names of her conditions. He'd pressed the cardiologist about potential, underlying, undiagnosed heart defects with an almost academic curiosity that felt clinical. At the time, I dismissed it as the worry of a devoted fiancé. Now it felt like research. The second item on my list was a hiking trip they had taken 6 months prior. Clara, who was not a particularly experienced hiker, had slipped near the edge of a steep ravine. Liam had caught her, saving her from a nasty fall. She had come home shaken, but full of praise for his quick reflexes. "He saved my life, Alara," she had gushed. It had become a part of their story, a romantic, dramatic anecdote. But I remembered a conversation a week before that trip. I'd been at their apartment, and Liam was meticulously oiling a pair of old hiking boots. I'd asked if they were his. "No, they're Clara's," he'd said with a smile. "Her old ones, the tread is almost completely gone. I keep telling her to get new ones, but she's so sentimental." He'd laughed it off. Why would he let her wear dangerously worn boots on a treacherous trail? Especially when he was so safety-conscious about everything else. It could have been an oversight, a simple mistake. But placed next to his intense interest in her medical conditions, it formed a small, dark pattern. Then there was the money. Clara had inherited a substantial trust fund from our grandmother. It wasn't something she ever talked about, but it afforded her a level of financial freedom that she rarely used, preferring to live modestly off her salary as a graphic designer. Liam knew about it, of course. He had been with her when the final paperwork was signed. I remembered him joking about it. "Guess you don't need me anymore?" he'd teased, and she had swatted his arm playfully. But I also remembered a later conversation when he and I were alone in the kitchen during a family dinner. He'd asked me, in a very casual, offhand way, about the specifics of the trust. Is it all set up in her name? Are there any stipulations? About marriage, for instance? I'd been a bit taken aback by the directness of the question. "I don't know, Liam. That's really Clara's business," I had replied, feeling uncomfortable. He had dropped it immediately, smiling that easy smile. Of course, just curious. Want to make sure my girl is taken care of." At the time, it felt like responsible fiancé talk. Now it felt like an inventory, a series of fainting spells, a near-fatal accident, a keen interest in her finances. Each incident on its own was explainable, but together, they painted a portrait of a man who was not building a future with my sister, but rather gathering data. He was assessing her vulnerabilities, both physical and financial. The wedding day fiasco started to shift in my mind. It wasn't a crime of passion. It was a calculated retreat. Something had gone wrong with his plan. What was it? Had he discovered the trust had a clause preventing him from inheriting if they were married for less than a certain amount of time? Or was it simpler? Was it me? Had he sensed my suspicion? I had always been the quiet observer in the family, the one who noticed the small details. Had I asked one too many questions, looked at him with a flicker of doubt he couldn't afford to ignore? His decision to publicly humiliate Clara and simultaneously frame me suddenly made a terrifying kind of sense. It wasn't about escaping the marriage, it was about repositioning himself. By painting himself as the tortured soul and me as the temptress, he achieved two critical goals. First, he created a plausible reason for ending the engagement that had nothing to do with money or anything sinister. Second, and more importantly, he drove a wedge between me and Clara, ensuring that if I ever did start voicing my suspicions, I would have zero credibility. I would just be the bitter, spurned other woman, trying to lash out. He wasn't just leaving, he was salting the earth behind him. The realization hit me with the force of a physical impact. This man had been planning to harm my sister. He had been grooming her, not for marriage, but for something else, for her death. And his grand performance at the altar was his exit strategy, a way to abort the mission while leaving himself in the clear and my sister emotionally devastated and isolated. The anger that had been a small hard knot inside me now burned hot and bright. He had played us all. He had used my family's love and trust as a weapon against us, and he was getting away with it. I looked at the timeline I had scrawled on a legal pad, the damning constellation of seemingly innocent events. It was a theory, a terrifying, monstrous theory, built on whispers and shadows. I had no proof. No one would believe me, but I didn't need them to. I just needed to prove it to myself, and then I needed to prove it to Clara. I had to find a way back to her. I had to get through the wall of lies Liam had so expertly constructed, because I was no longer just trying to clear my name. I was trying to save my sister's life. The first step was to break out of my gilded cage. Waiting for my family to come to their senses was a luxury I couldn't afford. Liam was out there, untethered, and Clara was a wreck, vulnerable and emotionally compromised. A perfect target if he decided to try a different approach. I packed a small bag one evening while my parents were engrossed in a television show. The manufactured drama, a pale imitation of the one consuming our lives. I wrote a short, simple note. I need some time. I love you both. I'm safe. Leaving out the part about how I believed they were harboring a man who had been plotting to murder their daughter seemed prudent for the moment. I slipped out the back door, the click of the latch sounding like a gunshot in the quiet night. My car was where I'd left it after the wedding, a silent testament to my exile. The engine turning over was the first, real sound of freedom I'd heard in a week. I didn't go to a friend's house. I couldn't risk involving anyone else. Couldn't bear to see the doubt in their eyes, too. I checked into a nondescript motel on the far side of town, a place of peeling paint and flickering neon, paying in cash. Anonymity was my shield. In the sterile quiet of the room, with its faint scent of bleach and stale cigarettes, I laid out my plan. I couldn't confront Liam directly. He was too smart, too slippery. And I couldn't go to the police. What would I tell them? My sister's ex-fiancé asked some weird questions and she almost fell on a hike? They would laugh me out of the station. No, I had to find something concrete, something undeniable. And that meant digging into Liam's past. He had presented himself as a man with a simple, unremarkable history. He'd told us he was an orphan, raised by a distant aunt in Oregon, who had passed away years ago. He'd moved here for a fresh start, working as a freelance financial consultant. It was a neat, tragic backstory that elicited sympathy and conveniently left no family to ask probing questions. It was also, I suspected, a complete fabrication. I started with the basics, using the motel's spotty Wi-Fi. I ran his name through every public records search I could find. Liam Porter. It was a common enough name. Dozens of them popped up across the country. I cross-referenced them with the date of birth he'd put on the wedding invitations. The search narrowed. I found a Liam Porter with the correct birth date who had lived in Oregon, but the trail went cold about 5 years ago. There was no social media presence to speak of. Beyond a bare-bones professional networking profile that listed a degree from a university I'd never heard of. I called the university's registrar the next morning. They had no record of a Liam Porter ever graduating or even attending. The first lie. It was a small thing, but it was solid. It was a crack in the foundation of the man he pretended to be. My heart hammered against my ribs. I was on the right path. For the next 48 hours, I lived on coffee and adrenaline, diving deeper into the digital rabbit hole. I searched for the aunt's name he had mentioned, Marianne Porter. I found an obituary for a woman with that name in Portland, Oregon, who had died 10 years ago. The obituary listed her surviving relatives. Liam's name was not among them. The second lie. He had plucked a random name from an obituary and claimed her as his own, knowing no one would ever think to check. The man we knew as Liam Porter was a ghost, a carefully constructed identity. So who was he really? The breakthrough came from a place I hadn't expected. I was scrolling through old photos on Clara's social media page, from the early days of their relationship. There was a picture of them at a charity gala. In the background, partially obscured, was a man who looked strikingly like Liam, but younger, with a different hairstyle, talking to a woman I didn't recognize. It was the woman's face that caught my eye. There was a flicker of familiarity about her. I saved the image and ran a reverse image search. It took hours, sifting through hundreds of irrelevant results, but then I found it. A local news article from a small town in Pennsylvania, dated 7 years ago. The article was about a tragic boating accident. A young couple's canoe had capsized during a sudden storm. The man had survived, clinging to the overturned vessel for hours. The woman, a 26-year-old heiress named Jessica Albright, had drowned. Her body was recovered days later. The man in the picture with her, her grieving fiancé, was him. His name wasn't Liam Porter. It was Daniel Finch. The story was heartbreaking. Daniel Finch, the sole survivor, had been lauded for his desperate attempts to save her. He had inherited a small portion of her fortune, a sum she had stipulated in her will for him shortly after their engagement. After the tragedy, he had, according to the article, left town to escape the painful memories. My blood ran cold. It was the same pattern. A wealthy woman, a recent engagement, a tragic, unforeseeable accident. He had done this before. He had gotten away with it. Liam Porter was the identity he had created to start over, to find a new target. And my sister had been next. I felt a wave of nausea so intense I had to grip the edge of the cheap motel desk. This was no longer a theory, this was real. I was staring at the face of a man who had killed at least once and had been preparing to do it again. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely use the mouse. I printed the article, the grainy photo of a younger but unmistakable Daniel Finch, staring up at me from the page. This was the proof. This was what I needed. But what now? If I went to the police with this, would they listen? It was circumstantial. A man with a tragic past and a new name. It wasn't a crime to change your name and start over. They might see a grieving man, not a predator. And if they questioned him, they would tip him off. He would disappear again, melting back into the ether, free to find another Jessica, another Clara. And he would know that I was the one who had exposed him. The thought sent a jolt of pure fear through me. He had already demonstrated his willingness to be ruthless. He had destroyed my reputation and my family relationships on a whim, as a simple strategic maneuver. What would he do to the person who threatened to expose him as a murderer? The flickering neon sign outside my window cast the room in a sickly red glow. I felt trapped, holding a truth so explosive it could get me killed. Going to the police was a risk, but not going was a greater one. He was still near Clara. He was still, in her mind, the man who had loved her, but was torn apart by his feelings for me. She was heartbroken, confused, and utterly defenseless. He could still get to her. He could try to finish what he started. The motel room suddenly felt like a cage. The walls were closing in. I had to warn her. I had to make her believe me. I grabbed my car keys, the printed news article clutched in my hand. I didn't have a complete plan. I was operating on pure, terrified instinct, but I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't going to let him have my sister. The drive back to my parents' house was a torment of second-guessing. How would I even get in? How could I get past my mother's protective wall and Clara's own grief-stricken anger? As I pulled onto their quiet suburban street, I saw my answer. The house was dark, except for a single light in the upstairs window, Clara's room. My parents' car was gone. A neighborhood block party, I suddenly remembered. They went every year. They must have dragged themselves there, trying to maintain a brave face for the neighbors. Clara had been left alone. It was the perfect opportunity. I parked a block away and approached the house on foot, sticking to the shadows. It felt absurdly clandestine, sneaking up on my own childhood home. I still had my key. I let myself in, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. The house was eerily silent. I crept up the stairs, each tread groaning under my weight, betraying me. I reached her door and listened. I could hear faint, muffled sobs from within. My own heart ached for her. She was in so much pain, and I was about to make it infinitely worse. I knocked softly. "Clara, it's me. Please, can I come in?" The sobbing stopped. Silence. Then her voice, thick with tears but sharp with anger. "Go away, Alara. Please, Clara, just for 5 minutes. I have to show you something. It's important. It's about Liam." "I don't want to hear his name," she choked out. "And I especially don't want to hear it from you." "I know you're hurting," I pleaded, my voice cracking. "I know you hate me right now, but you are in danger. Please just open the door." I waited, holding my breath. For a long moment, I thought she would refuse. Then I heard the click of the lock. The door opened a few inches. Her face was puffy and blotched, her eyes red-rimmed and full of a misery so profound it was like looking into a well. But beneath the grief, there was a flicker of something else, a deep, burning resentment aimed directly at me. "What?" she said, her voice flat. "What could you possibly have to say?" I held out the printed article. "His name isn't Liam Porter," I said, my voice low and urgent. "It's Daniel Finch, and you're not the first wealthy fiancé he's had. The last one died." Clara stared at the piece of paper in my hand as if it were a venomous snake. She didn't take it. Her eyes, clouded with grief, narrowed with suspicion. "What is this?" she whispered, her voice raw. "More lies. Did you dig this up to try and make him look bad? To justify what you did?" The accusation, the sheer depth of her belief in my betrayal, was like a physical blow. For a moment, my resolve wavered. How could I fight this? Liam's poison had gone deep. "It's not a lie, Clara. Just look at the picture," I urged, pushing the paper closer. "Look at his face." Reluctantly, she took it. Her fingers trembled as she held the grainy printout. I watched her eyes scan the headline, then flit down to the photograph of the smiling young couple. A small, sharp intake of breath was the only sound in the room. She looked from the picture to my face and back again. The anger in her expression began to curdle into a horrified confusion. This looks like him," she stammered. "But it's not. It can't be." "It is," I said gently. "He called himself Daniel Finch. His fiancée, Jessica Albright, drowned in a boating accident. He was the only survivor. She had just named him in her will." I watched the pieces click into place behind her eyes, the dawning horror warring with the love and trust she had felt for him for 2 years. Her entire reality was tilting, and she was struggling to find her footing. "No," she said, shaking her head, her voice rising. "No, Liam wouldn't. He loved me. The accident. It was a tragedy. You're twisting it. You're trying to make him into a monster because you're jealous." She threw the paper on the floor, her chest heaving. The denial was a shield, a desperate attempt to protect herself from a truth too terrible to comprehend. "Think, Clara," I pressed, my voice gaining an urgency I couldn't control. "Think about the last year, the fainting spells when he was so interested in every medical detail. The hiking trip, when he let you wear those old, worn-out boots? His questions about your trust fund? He wasn't planning a wedding. He was planning an accident, your accident. Every word was a hammer blow, and I could see her flinching, see the memories resurfacing, now cast in a sinister new light. Her face went pale, the last of the color draining away. She sank onto the edge of her bed, her hands covering her face. "Why?" she sobbed. "Why would he do all this? Why the wedding? Why did he look at you?" "I don't know why he aborted the plan," I said honestly, kneeling in front of her. "Maybe he got spooked. Maybe he thought I was suspicious. But the scene at the wedding, that was a smokescreen, Clara. It was to discredit me, to make sure you would never ever believe me if I tried to warn you. He isolated you. It was the most brilliant, cruel thing I could have possibly done." She looked up at me then, her eyes swimming with tears, the anger finally gone, replaced by a vast, terrifying sea of fear. "He knows you're here, doesn't he?" she whispered. The question hung in the air, cold and sharp. Before I could answer, a floorboard creaked downstairs. We both froze. Every nerve ending in my body screamed. My parents weren't due back for hours. A profound, unnatural silence seemed to settle over the house, the kind of quiet that feels like a held breath. Then a voice from the bottom of the stairs, calm and familiar, but laced with a chilling thread of amusement. "Clara, are you okay up there? I saw the light on. I was worried about you." It was Liam. My blood turned to ice. How did he know I was here? Had he been watching the house? Had he followed me? The casual, concerned tone of his voice was more terrifying than any shout. It was the voice of the predator, confident and in control, feigning concern for the prey he had cornered. Clara's hand flew to her mouth, stifling a scream. Her eyes were wide with terror, fixed on the bedroom door. We were trapped. The old house, my childhood sanctuary, had become a cage, and the monster was inside. "Don't answer," I mouthed, my heart pounding against my ribs, so hard I thought it would break. I grabbed her arm, pulling her away from the bed, toward the far corner of the room, away from the door. I pointed to her phone, then put a finger to my lips. She fumbled for it on her nightstand, her hands shaking uncontrollably. I could hear his footsteps on the stairs, slow and deliberate. Not the sound of someone coming to check on a loved one. The sound of someone who knows they have all the time in the world. He was savoring this. "Clara, sweetheart, I know you're upset," he called out, his voice closer now, just outside the door. "But we need to talk. Alara has been filling your head with poison. She's trying to tear us apart." His words were for her, but the threat was for me. He knew I was in there with her. He was playing a game, trying to manipulate her one last time, to turn her against me even now. I saw her hesitate, her thumb hovering over the keypad of her phone. The years of trust he had built were a powerful anesthetic, even now, fighting against the horrifying truth. "He's lying, Clara," I whispered fiercely. "He's going to hurt us. Call 911 now." The doorknob began to turn. It was an old brass knob that never latched properly. I had a split second to react. I threw my entire body weight against the door, slamming it shut just as he was pushing it open. The wood shuddered on its hinges. "Alara," he said, his voice changing instantly. The warmth was gone, replaced by a flat, cold menace. "Open the door." "Stay away from us," I yelled, my voice trembling but loud. I braced my feet against the carpet, using all my strength to hold the door. He pushed again, harder this time. The door groaned, the frame splintering. He was stronger than I was. I couldn't hold him for long. "Clara, did you call?" I grunted, the strain making my voice tight. She was frozen, her face a mask of pure terror, the phone clutched in her white-knuckled hand. "Clara," I screamed. My scream seemed to break the spell. She fumbled with the phone, her fingers finally hitting the screen. She pressed it to her ear, her voice a choked, terrified whisper as she spoke to the dispatcher. Liam or Daniel or whatever his name was heard it too. A furious guttural roar came from the other side of the door. The time for games was over. He threw his shoulder against the wood with incredible force. There was a loud crack, and the door flew open, sending me stumbling backward onto the floor. He stood in the doorway, and the man I saw was not the charming, handsome fiancé we had all known. His face was a contorted mask of pure rage, his eyes black with a terrifying emptiness. The civilized veneer had been stripped away, revealing the predator beneath. "You just couldn't leave it alone, could you?" he snarled, his eyes locking onto me. He took a step into the room, his movements slow, deliberate, like a wolf closing in. "You ruined everything." He ignored Clara, who was huddled in the corner, still on the phone with the dispatcher, her words a frantic, broken stream. His entire focus, all his murderous rage, was directed at me. I scrambled backward on the floor, my hands slipping on the polished wood, trying to put distance between us. The room, which had always felt like a spacious haven, now seemed small and claustrophobic, a dead end. "It was perfect," he hissed, advancing on me. She was perfect, so trusting, so fragile. The inheritance would have set me up for life. No more running, no more new names. His confession was cold and matter-of-fact, the casual cruelty of it more shocking than his anger. He was talking about my sister as if she were an investment portfolio, a resource to be liquidated. Jessica was a trial run, he continued, a grotesque smile twisting his lips. A bit messy. I learned a lot from that. With Clara, it was going to be clean, a tragic little accident, an undiagnosed heart condition, a fall, so many sad possibilities. Everyone would have mourned, everyone would have felt sorry for me. He was in the middle of the room now, standing over me. I pushed myself up against the wall, my breath coming in ragged, shallow gasps. There was nowhere left to run. "But you," he said, his voice dropping to a low, venomous whisper. "You were always watching, the quiet one. I saw the way you looked at me, the questions in your eyes. I knew you'd be a problem. That's why I did what I did at the wedding. It was supposed to neutralize you, make you the villain, give me time to regroup, come up with a new plan for dear sweet Clara." I could hear the distant wail of sirens, a faint, hopeful sound growing steadily louder. He heard them too. A flicker of annoyance crossed his face, quickly replaced by a chillingly calm resolve. His timeline had just been accelerated. "No time for that now," he said, almost to himself. "Have to clean up the loose ends." He lunged for me. I reacted on pure instinct, kicking out with my legs, my foot connecting with his knee. He grunted in pain and surprise, his balance faltering for just a second. It was the only chance I was going to get. I scrambled to my feet and ran for the only other exit, the window. It was an old sash window that overlooked the steep slope of the porch roof. I fumbled with the lock, my fingers slick with sweat. It was stiff, painted over from years of neglect. He was right behind me, his hand grabbing for my shoulder. I twisted away, his fingers catching the fabric of my shirt, ripping it. I threw all my weight into shoving the window upward. It moved with a screech of protest, opening just enough for me to squeeze through. I tumbled out onto the angled, slippery shingles of the roof, the rough surface scraping my hands and knees. The night air was cold against my skin. Below me, the ground seemed terrifyingly far away. I could see the flashing blue and red lights now, turning into our street, getting closer. He was at the window, his face a mask of fury in the pale moonlight. "You're not getting away," he snarled, starting to climb out after me. I crab-walked backward, my feet searching for purchase on the steep incline. The sirens were deafening now. 2 police cars screeching to a halt in front of the house, doors slammed, voices shouted, "This is the police! Come out with your hands up!" The command echoed in the night. For a moment, he froze, caught between his prey on the roof and the authorities below. I saw the calculation in his eyes, the rapid assessment of his options. He wasn't going to surrender. Surrender meant life in prison. He looked at me with an expression of pure, unadulterated hatred. If he was going down, he was going to take me with him. He launched himself across the roof toward me. I screamed, a raw, primal sound of terror, and threw myself sideways. My body slid down the shingles, my nails scrabbling for a handhold, finding nothing. My feet went over the edge. For a heart-stopping second, I was hanging there, my fingers clamped onto the cold, unforgiving metal of the gutter. My arms screamed in protest, my muscles straining. I could feel the gutter groaning under my weight, pulling away from the wood. He was above me, his face peering over the edge, a triumphant, savage look in his eyes. He lifted his foot to stomp on my fingers. But just as his foot came down, a bright, powerful beam of light hit him directly in the face, a spotlight from the yard below. "Freeze! Police!" another voice shouted. He flinched, momentarily blinded. That split-second hesitation was everything. With a surge of adrenaline, I swung my legs, trying to find the trellis that ran up the side of the house, just a few feet to my left. My foot connected with the wooden slats. It was flimsy, but it was something. I let go of the gutter with one hand, grabbing onto the trellis. It swayed precariously. Wood splintered. He recovered from the light, his rage renewed. He stomped down hard, not on my fingers, but on the gutter right where it was already pulling loose. There was a screech of tearing metal, and the entire section of guttering I was still clinging to ripped away from the house. I was falling, but my other hand still had a desperate grip on the trellis. My body swung violently, slamming into the wall of the house, knocking the wind out of me. I hung there, gasping, my feet dangling 10 feet from the ground, the trellis groaning in protest. Above, on the roof, Daniel, made his final desperate move. He wasn't trying to get to me anymore. He ran along the peak of the roof toward the back of the house, toward the darkness of the backyard, seeking an escape. A police officer was already climbing onto the porch roof, moving with a speed and confidence that I could only marvel at. Another officer was circling the house from the ground. They had him cornered. I watched, still clinging to the splintering wood, as he reached the far edge of the roof. He looked down into the dark yard, then back at the approaching officer. He was trapped. There was no way out. He gave one last hateful look in my direction, a look that promised that even in defeat, he would haunt me. Then he jumped. There was no heroic leap, no desperate bid for freedom. He just fell, his body a clumsy, awkward shape in the darkness. He landed with a sickening, final crunch in the bushes at the back of the house. And then there was silence, broken only by the sound of my own ragged breathing and the pounding of my heart. The aftermath was a whirlwind of flashing lights, crackling radios, and the calm, authoritative voices of people who deal with chaos for a living. Paramedics helped me down from the trellis, my body shaking so violently I could barely stand. They wrapped me in a thick blanket, their questions about injuries a distant buzz in my ears. I was scraped, bruised, and my shoulder felt like it had been wrenched from its socket. But I was alive. My parents arrived home to a scene of utter bedlam, their quiet street clogged with emergency vehicles, their front lawn swarming with police officers, and their 2 daughters, one in shock and the other being treated by EMTs. The confusion on their faces was quickly replaced by dawning horror as the story was pieced together for them by a grim-faced detective. I saw the moment the truth landed, the moment they understood. My mother looked at me, her eyes filled with a terrible, gut-wrenching mixture of guilt and relief. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. She just took a step toward me and then another, until she was wrapping her arms around me, holding on as if she was afraid I would blow away. "Oh, Ilara," she sobbed into my hair. "I'm so sorry, I'm so sorry." I held on to her, the warmth of her embrace a balm on my frayed nerves. My father stood beside us, his face ashen, his hand on my back. A silent apology and a promise of protection all in one. The wall that had stood between us for the past week crumbled into dust. Clara was sitting in the back of an Yamayo ambulance, a different blanket around her shoulders, giving her statement to a female officer. Her voice was quiet but steady. The catatonic, grief-stricken girl from the bedroom was gone, replaced by someone who looked fragile but strangely resolute. She had survived. We both had. Daniel Finch, alias Liam Porter, had not been so lucky. His desperate jump from the roof had ended his flight permanently. The paramedics pronounced him dead at the scene, his body broken in the dark anonymity of my parents' azalea bushes. There was no trial, no public reckoning for his crimes. His death was a sudden, violent end to a story he had so carefully authored. In some ways, it felt like a mercy. We would not have to face him in court, would not have to listen to his lies, would not have to relive the terror over and over. But in another way, it felt like a theft. He had escaped justice, leaving behind a wake of unanswered questions and unhealed wounds. The police were thorough. The investigation into Daniel Finch's life revealed a pattern of deception and predation that was even more extensive than I had discovered. Jessica Albright was not his first victim. They found evidence linking him to the disappearance of a wealthy college student in Colorado a decade earlier, a case that had long gone cold. He was a chameleon, a sociopath who moved from place to place, identity to identity, preying on women who had 2 things in common: money and a trusting nature. He would insinuate himself into their lives, become their perfect partner, and then, when the time was right, he would erase them and absorb their assets. He had been planning it with Clara for over a year. A search of the apartment he had shared with her uncovered a horrifying collection of research, detailed printouts of her medical records, books on poisons that mimicked heart failure, and articles on how to stage accidental falls. He had even forged a new will for her, leaving everything to him, and was likely waiting for the right moment to have her sign it, perhaps disguised within a stack of other prenuptial paperwork. The wedding, the police theorized, was his masterstroke. Had his plan succeeded, he would have married her, and a few months later, she would have died in a tragic accident. He would have been the grieving widower, inheriting her fortune. But his public rejection of her at the altar was his contingency plan. By framing me, He created a narrative of heartbreak and betrayal, so compelling that it would have provided him with the perfect alibi. Who would suspect a man so publicly devastated by a broken heart? He could have laid low for a few months, then re-entered Clara's life, forgiving her for her sister's supposed transgression, and his plan would have been back on track. My intervention had forced his hand, cornering him and exposing the monster behind the mask. The revelation sent shockwaves through our community. The story of the jilted bride and the treacherous sister was replaced by a much darker, more sensational tale. We were no longer objects of gossip, but of a morbid, pitying fascination. The world that had judged me so harshly a week ago now looked at me as a hero. But I didn't feel like a hero. I felt like a survivor, raw and exposed, haunted by the ghost of the man who had smiled at our dinner table and plotted my sister's murder. The days turned into weeks. My parents, consumed by a fierce, protective guilt, hovered over Clara and me. The house was quiet, the silences no longer hostile, but heavy with unspoken grief and the slow, arduous work of healing. My relationship with Clara was the most delicate thing to mend. The chasm Liam had created between us was deep. There was so much pain, so much misplaced anger and betrayal. We didn't talk about it at first. We couldn't. Instead, we found our way back to each other in small, quiet ways. I would make her tea, and she would save me the last piece of cake. We would sit in the living room and read, the shared silence a comfortable, familiar thing from our childhood. One evening, about a month after that terrible night, she came into my room and sat on the edge of my bed, just as I had done in hers. She was holding the small framed photo from her nightstand, a picture of the two of us as children, all missing teeth and scraped knees. "I'm sorry, Alara," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "I'm so sorry I didn't believe you. I let him turn me against the one person who was actually trying to protect me." Tears welled in her eyes and in mine. "You had no reason to doubt him," I said, my own voice thick with emotion. "He fooled all of us. That was his gift." "His gift was finding people's weaknesses," she said, a new, hard edge to her voice. "He found mine. I wanted the fairy tale so badly, I was willing to ignore everything else." She looked at me, her gaze clear and direct, for the first time in what felt like an eternity. "You were the only one strong enough to see the truth. You saved my life." She reached out and took my hand, her grip firm. I'll never forget that. I'll never let anything come between us again. In that moment, holding my sister's hand, I felt the last of the ice in my chest finally begin to melt. The trust between us, so violently broken, was beginning to knit itself back together, stronger now, forged in fire and fear. We were not the same two sisters we had been before Liam. We were scarred, we were changed, but we were together, and we had survived. The journey back to normalcy was a slow, uneven path, more of a meandering trail through a dark wood than a straight road. For months, every creak of the house at night would send a jolt of adrenaline through me. Every new person I met was viewed through a lens of deep suspicion. Trust, once a simple, default setting, now felt like a dangerous luxury. Liam, or Daniel, was gone, but the ghost of his betrayal lingered, a toxic residue that coated everything. Clara bore the deepest scars. She had not only lost a man she loved, she had lost the reality she believed she was living in. The memories of their 2 years together were now tainted, every happy moment a calculated lie, every tender word a part of his monstrous script. She underwent intense therapy to process the trauma and the profound violation of trust. There were days she was silent and withdrawn, lost in a labyrinth of what-ifs, and other days when she was filled with a white-hot rage that left her exhausted and empty. My parents sold the house. There were too many memories there, the final terrible one, having poisoned all the happy ones that came before. We moved to a new town, a place where we weren't the family from the news. It was a chance to breathe, to be anonymous, to start the painstaking process of building a new life on the foundations of the old one. I became Clara's shadow, her protector. I screened her calls, sat with her through panic attacks, and simply existed as a constant, steady presence in her life. The roles we had played our whole lives had been reversed. She, who had always been the outgoing, confident one, now leaned on me, the quiet, observant younger sister. Our bond, reforged in trauma, became the central pillar of our new lives. We were more than sisters. We were fellow survivors, tethered by an experience no one else could ever truly understand. Slowly, painstakingly, the light began to return. It started with small things, a genuine laugh from Clara over a stupid movie, a day when I went for a walk and didn't look over my shoulder every 10 seconds, a family dinner that felt normal, filled with easy conversation instead of heavy silences. We were healing not by forgetting, but by integrating the horror into the fabric of who we were now. The experience had changed me profoundly. The quiet observer had been forced to become a fighter, a detective, a survivor. I discovered a strength within myself I never knew I possessed. That strength gave me a new sense of purpose. I went back to school, pursuing a degree in forensic psychology. I wanted to understand the dark corners of the human mind, to learn what creates a Daniel Finch. I wanted to help other people, to be the person who sees the cracks in the facade, who listens to the nagging voice of instinct that says something is wrong. Clara, too, found a new path. She poured her pain and her anger into art. Her graphic design work, once bright and commercial, became darker, more complex, and deeply expressive. She started showing her work in small galleries, and people responded to the raw, honest emotion in her pieces. She was taking the ugliest experience of her life and transforming it into something beautiful and powerful. She was reclaiming her own narrative. About 2 years after that night, we were sitting on the porch of our new house, watching the sunset paint the sky in strokes of orange and purple. It was the anniversary of the wedding that never was. We didn't speak of it directly, but the date hung in the air between us, a shared, silent acknowledgement. "Do you ever wonder," Clara said quietly, her eyes on the horizon, "if you hadn't been there, if you hadn't been so, you?" I knew what she meant. If I hadn't been the watchful one, the sister who noticed the little things, the one who couldn't let go of the feeling that something was wrong. "I try not to," I said honestly. "It's not a good road to go down." "I go down it sometimes," she confessed, "and I always end up in the same place. I end up grateful that my annoying, over-analytical little sister never stopped paying attention." She smiled at me, a real, genuine smile that reached her eyes. The haunted look was gone, replaced by a quiet strength that was more beautiful than her bridal glow had ever been. "He picked the wrong family to mess with," she said. "He thought he was getting one fragile, trusting girl. He didn't realize he was getting a package deal." We sat in comfortable silence as the last sliver of sun disappeared, leaving the sky in a soft, dusky twilight. The world kept turning. Life, improbably, wonderfully, went on. The scars were still there, of course, They would always be there. They were a part of our story now, a dark chapter in the book of our lives. But they were not the whole story. The story was also about resilience. It was about the unbreakable bond between two sisters. It was about finding the strength to fight back when the monster is someone you love. It was about walking out of the darkness, bruised and battered, but walking out together. I looked at my sister, her face calm in the fading light, and I felt a profound sense of peace settle over me. The fear was finally gone, replaced by a quiet yet fierce love. He had tried to destroy us. He had tried to tear us apart and leave us in ruins. But he had failed. He had only made us stronger. We had survived him. And we would continue to survive, together, carrying the lessons of the past not as a burden, but as a shield. The night was quiet, the air was cool, and for the first time in a long, long time, we were both truly safe.